The Sum of Their Parts, written by Holdmybeer. Chapter 5. The Longbottom Manor wards greeted Harry cautiously, but they weren't outright hostile. Harry let them do their job and waited patiently at the entrance to the stately old building. There were a number of garden supplies resting against the wall by the door, a good indication that Neville was home. Harry had heard him sigh often enough about having to leave his gardens to a house elf for most of the year. Harry didn't get it, but Neville had always been adamant that it just didn't look the same when he didn't do it himself. Eventually, the door opened, and Neville looked at him with a vaguely startled expression. "Harry?" "Hey, Nev," Harry greeted. "Got a place to talk? It's sort of family business." Neville's surprise was replaced by cautious curiosity. "Sure, right this way." Harry followed Neville into the depths of the sprawling garden surrounding the manor, and part of him wasn't actually surprised that a safe place to talk to Neville meant the garden rather than the stuffy, claustrophobic old manor. It was fine with Harry. He was in no real rush. The Lestrange bodies had timed portkeys on them that wouldn't trigger for another hour or so, which left plenty of time to talk with Neville. They passed through a neatly trimmed arch in a silvery hedge into a perfectly circular clearing with an old bench in the middle. Thornleaf. They don't take kindly to being touched, and they remember who waters them. They make a very good eavesdropper deterrent. Neville cast a series of privacy spells and waited for Harry to add a few more before he turned his attention back to his guest. "Good enough?" "Yeah." Harry took a slow breath, then offered 2 wands to Neville, who accepted them cautiously. He stared at Harry, then down at the wands, and back at Harry again. "Rabastan and Rodolphus Lestrange are dead," Harry said formally. "The Lestrange family is no more. Your parents have been avenged." Neville's breath caught, and his hands tightened around the wands, looking like he was torn between tossing the 2 pieces of wood far, far away and never letting go of them again. "Harry?" They went after Teddy. Neville nodded once. Nothing more needed to be said. Then he stood a little straighter, every bit the imposing war hero he had been at Hogwarts. "The Longbottom family offers its gratitude to Lord Potter," the man stated, as formal as Harry had been, then softer. "Thank you, Harry." Neville held out his hand. Harry grasped it without hesitation. Harry was brought in for questioning 3 days later. They had nothing to pin on him. No evidence, nothing in the slightest, but the Lestrange brothers had been found dead, and the last anyone had seen of them, they had been fleeing after targeting Harry's extended family. If they had only been found dead, perhaps that would have been the end of it. That they had been found dead, with traces of at least 2 of the 3 unforgivables on them, the DMLE was very determined to find out who had done it. Enough, so that someone far up in the system had authorized Veritaserum questioning. It wouldn't be good in court, but it would give them a place to start their investigation and an idea of where to dig for evidence. They hadn't bothered to check his wand, but Harry wasn't surprised. There were a number of Hogwarts students out there who had learned to clear the spell record from their wands out of sheer necessity. Harry's own wand would show nothing but ordinary spells. Kingsley Shacklebolt wasn't there, but someone had brought in Minerva McGonagall, not as headmistress of Hogwarts, but as leader of the Order of the Phoenix after Shacklebolt's job as minister had made it impossible to continue as leader. The Order hadn't met since the war, but it had technically not been disbanded yet. Harry wondered if Shacklebolt was the one who had called her in. For support or something else, who knew? "Headmistress," he greeted as he sat down in the chair in the interrogation room. He had not bothered arguing or asking to contact his solicitor. The British wizarding world did not believe in bringing in solicitors until someone had been formally charged. It was yet another thing on Harry's long list of issues that needed fixed one day. The only good thing he could say was that the chair didn't have chains on it. "I'm Mr. Potter," McGonagall sighed. A trouble magnet as usual. Harry gave a wry smile. "I was one of the last to see the Lestranges alive when they attacked Teddy and Hermione. In their place, I'd question me too." McGonagall didn't answer as one of the auras appeared. Harry didn't recognize him, but he was too old to be one of the small post-war clutch of new recruits, and he moved with the calm, economical motions of a trained fighter. Behind him was a far younger man who looked visibly nervous, or at least visibly nervous to someone who had grown as used to looking for that sort of thing as Harry had. "Mr. Potter," the older of the two greeted, "I'm Aura Toke, and this is Aura Trainee Lochrin." The Toke name was vaguely familiar to Harry, but not as anything more than a vague reference to wizarding families in several of the many books he had gone through. Lochrin was utterly unfamiliar to him. "Aura," he greeted, "Aura Trainee." In a different world, it might have been him at Toke's side, learning from a more experienced Aura. The Ministry had been more than ready to fast-track him through Aura training. "We need to test you for the Veritaserum antidote and memory charms, then we will continue with the questioning," Aura Toke explained and glanced at McGonagall. "Headmistress McGonagall is here upon the Minister's request." "We worked together during the war," Harry answered the unspoken question as vaguely as he could. "If I had been the one to kill the Lestranges, there would be a number of other questions she'd have to ask to ensure the safety of a number of people." McGonagall nodded slightly. Harry figured it meant he hadn't said too much then. Aura Toke cast a string of wordless spells that Harry didn't catch, then handed Harry a small bottle of a bright yellow potion. "You have no sign of memory spells or the antidote, but just in case, that potion will flush out any effects of the antidote." Harry was used to foul potions and knocked it back without flinching. It tasted somewhat rancid, but there was a glass of water on the table to rise out the taste. The potion settled as a warm feeling in his stomach, but nothing else happened. The two Auras watched him for a long minute before they finally seemed satisfied that he wasn't under the antidote. "We are going to give you 3 drops of Veritaserum and ask you a list of questions," Aura Toke explained clinically. "You may not be aware of answering, some people are not. Once we have the answers, we will give you the antidote and bring you back out of the effects. Do you have any questions?" No! He just wanted it over with. He had learned to hide it, but he could feel the adrenaline in his body and the nerves that had just kicked in. They had learned to bypass Veritaserum to a degree, but this was the first time it would be more than training. This was the first time it was deadly serious. And he knew painfully well there were plenty of questions he would not be able to use his bonds to get out of. Not that he regretted it, not for a second. The dead Lestranges had sent a message to the rest of Voldemort's old followers, and Harry wanted them to see it. He let the Aura feed him the 3 drops of Veritaserum, and the world fell away around him in the familiar, unnerving way. "What is your name?" Even through the Veritaserum, Harry's nerves still kicked up a notch at the familiar question. "Harry James Potter," he answered truthfully. "Did you kill Rabastan and Rodolphus Lestrange?" Harry reached for his bonds in an instant, and his world became brighter and warmer. "No," he answered truthfully, because Ron Weasley did not. "Did you participate, assist, or were you in any other way involved in the murders of Rabastan and Rodolphus Lestrange?" "No," he answered truthfully, because Ron had not. "Do you know who were involved in the murders of Rabastan and Rodolphus Lestrange?" "No," Harry answered truthfully, because Ron did not. "Strongly suspected, yes. Knew beyond doubt, no. They were very careful about that, and Ron's world could be awfully black and white when he put his mind to it. It took a while longer before the next question came. "Have you ever cast an unforgivable curse?" "No," Harry answered truthfully, because Ron had not. Minerva McGonagall's eyes narrowed. Harry was not consciously aware of it, but if he got out of this safely, he had explanations to give. Harry felt his head tilted back, and then the familiar taste of the antidote. The world cleared up, and his emotions returned. He took a deep swallow from the water to rinse out the aftertaste, then glanced at the Auras. Aura Toke's expression was the same smooth, unreadable professionalism, but the Aura trainee looked faintly surprised. Then he spotted McGonagall's expression. It was almost hidden, but Harry had been in trouble often enough to recognize the slight frown. "That should be all, Mr. Potter." Aura Toke said. "Thank you for your cooperation. We may contact you again if we have further questions, but that should be it for now." Harry nodded. "Any time." He took a deep breath. "Headmistress, may I accompany you to Hogwarts?" Whatever he had done might as well get it over with. "You may, Mr. Potter," McGonagall spoke. "Shall we?" Harry swallowed. Time to pay the piper. Almost a year of researching and practicing all kinds of spells had left Harry with a well-honed sensitivity to magic. When he had last seen Hogwarts in person the summer after Voldemort's defeat, he had felt only warm familiarity and the overwhelming sense of loss. Now Hogwarts' defences greeted him like a wall of charged air and sharp, prickly power that left him with goosebumps on his arms and a throbbing headache. Then they were through, and the power faded to a low murmur that left only the faded remnants of the headache behind. Minerva McGonagall at his side glanced at him with an unreadable expression. "Mr. Potter?" "A mild headache," Harry answered truthfully. He wasn't sure what she was looking for, and she had all too much experience with lying students for him to even attempt to evade the truth. "I've lived and practiced magic in Grimmauld Place since last summer and managed to pick up a sensitivity to magic along the way. I never knew the wards here were that powerful. We never removed all of the added defences we put in place before the last battle," the headmistress explained. "We want the students to feel safe, even with Death Eaters still on the run. Hogwarts was once the safest place in Britain, Mr. Potter. It has become so once again." Harry was never the most observant of people, but he got the undercurrent of that remark just fine. "You wanted to see how I reacted to it." He wasn't sure how to feel about that. Hogwarts was the first home he had known. Even now, when she felt different and strange, and he felt more like an intruder than anything, he still loved her and would defend her with everything he had. The thought that he had changed enough that Minerva McGonagall had doubts about his intentions left a feeling like lead in the pit of his stomach. "You successfully lied under Veritaserum, Mr. Potter." Her voice was tightly controlled. "We are both well aware that you have successfully cast at least one unforgivable curse, as most of us have after this war. You were tested for memory charms and the Veritaserum antidote, which leaves only exceptional occlumency skills as an explanation. And for all that Severus Snape was forced to stay cloaked in lies, I believe him when he stated that your occlumency skills were lacking at best. Maybe I had an easier time learning it now that I don't have Voldemort poking about my head and giving me migraines and nightmares. Ma'am," he added when his brain caught up with his mouth, "or maybe it's because Voldemort's ministry didn't consider them bloody unforgivable. Perhaps." McGonagall did not sound convinced, and they settled into an oppressive silence as they walked the long path towards the headmistress's office. Hogwarts had felt strange from the outside, the Hogwarts he had known, and still so different in ways he couldn't quite pinpoint. But it only got worse once they stepped inside the great hall. The cavernous room was still and utterly silent. The tables were cleared and the benches lined up with military precision. The massive hourglasses were empty, the points reset once the year ended, and the sound of their footsteps felt almost like sacrilege, like speaking in a cathedral or setting foot in an ancient tomb. In a way it was. The memories lurked right below that surface of death and blood and curses, and Harry swallowed against the bile that rose in his throat. "Mate?" Ron asked through the bond, with Hermione's concern right behind it. I'll be fine." He shuddered, but followed McGonagall along silently. He hadn't considered how bad it might be, hadn't considered how many memories still lingered, and Hermione had been there alone to research the Fidelius for them, with no bond to support her. "How did you do it?" Hermione was silent for a long time. "There were students then," she finally said softly. "I avoided the memories as much as I could, and I focused on my task, and I think Professor Flitwick knew. He was the one who met me at the gate, and he talked to me the entire way. It helped. Afterwards we had tea and discussed the Fidelius and charms theory, and it made it easier leaving. It distracted me." In that case, Harry owed their old charms professor a lot of thanks for being there for Hermione when they hadn't been. He didn't know the man all that much, even after 6 years at Hogwarts, but he would find a way to return the favor, somehow. "Mr. Potter?" Harry returned to the outside world again and was surprised to find himself staring at the gargoyle that guarded the headmistress's office. He wasn't normally this distracted when he talked with Ron and Hermione, and he quietly promised himself it wouldn't happen again. It was too much of a risk even here. Memories. It was only partially true, but seemed to do the trick as McGonagall's expression softened slightly. "Indeed, Campanula rotundifolia," she told the gargoyle, and it moved aside with the grind of stone against stone. Harry had no idea how Hermione had done it. The stairs leading up to the second door felt claustrophobic, and stepping into the brightness of the office was harder than facing Veritaserum with multiple murders on his conscience had been. It was orderly, Harry noticed when his eyes had grown used to the bright sunlight that streamed in from the windows. Like Dumbledore's office, there were plenty of books, but they were neatly sorted and lined up. The 2 on the desk were bookmarked and set aside to leave room for parchment and a Gryffindor red quill. The numerous trinkets were gone, replaced by a few carefully chosen decorations instead. It was both a relief to see the office so different, and a loss all the same. Most of the portraits were asleep, but there were a few exceptions, and the first one Harry spotted made his breath catch. "My dear boy," Albus Dumbledore spoke. His voice was as layered as it had been at times when he had been alive, affection and regret, and something Harry couldn't identify, but his painted eyes sparkled gently. Harry had a lot of issues with Dumbledore still, but those could wait for now. "Headmaster." He was vaguely proud that he managed to keep his voice steady against visions of Snape and Malfoy and killing Curse Green, but half of the credit went to Ron and Hermione, and the silent support he still felt through the bond. "You've grown, my boy," Dumbledore said, sounding a little like a bemused grandfather. "I was worried when I heard you had turned down the Aura program and settled alone in Grimmauld, but you look well, Harry. Ron and Hermione moved in with me in late April," Harry offered. McGonagall ignored for now. "It's easier with the 3 of us together. It keeps Hermione from vanishing into the books, Ron from lazing about too much, and the memories away from me. It works, sir." Someone to his left snorted, and Harry turned his head to find himself staring directly into the dark, pitiless eyes of Severus Snape's portrait. The world stilled. Ron's heartfelt "Oh, bollocks" overlapped with Hermione's "I had no idea he wasn't there when I visited, Harry. Harry." The world restarted with what felt like a sharp jerk. Harry took a slow breath. Then he raised his head defiantly. "Headmaster, I'm surprised to see your portrait." "Oh, yes, the Saviour would hardly want the Death-Eater bat of the dungeon among such illustrious headmasters as Phineas Nigellus Black. I assure you, Mr. Potter, that it was through no choice of my own." Harry didn't know when the portrait had been made, but they had managed his acerbic voice almost perfectly. Still, something seemed to be missing somehow. "Severus." McGonagall sounded disappointed and a little unsurprised. Then again she knew exactly how Snape and Harry's relationship had been. Harry took great satisfaction in turning around to look at his host again, very deliberately turning his back on Snape. The man may have been instrumental in the defeat of Voldemort, but so had a lot of other people, and Harry was not required to like him in the least. "What can I do for you, Headmistress?" Something flickered through McGonagall's eyes. "So formal, Mr. Potter." "You wanted to see my reaction to the wards," Harry pointed out, "or possibly the wards' reaction to me. Either way, that's generally not a sign of friendly territory." McGonagall nodded. "A reasonable assumption. Would you like to tell me then, Mr. Potter, why you positively reek of dark magic to the wards?" "Harry," Dumbledore began in that familiar, disappointed voice, but Harry ignored him. "Perhaps because I've spent a year renovating and living in Grimmauld Place, the home of the Black family and about 150 years of dark arts?" "Your presence is darker than that, Mr. Potter. Disapproval and judgment, like countless other times throughout his school years when his professors were effectively useless," and something in Harry snapped. "Those are very convenient wards, Headmistress. I wonder why they weren't raised after my first year when bloody Voldemort got inside the school. Mr. Potter, McGonagall looked furious. Harry didn't care in the slightest. Perhaps I feel dark, headmistress, because I carried around a Horcrux for 16 years, since Professor Dumbledore didn't bother raising those wards. How do you know I didn't feel even darker at 11, or at 14, when Voldemort was resurrected? Because it's bloody easier to believe the worst, just like the rest of the wizarding world. There was the vague idea that maybe he shouldn't be that insulting to the headmistress of Hogwarts in the heart of her realm and under her wards, but that idea vanished like wisps of smoke when Snape's portrait spoke again. "You insolent boy, learn your place and respect your betters." "You're dead, Snape," Harry bit out spitefully. "I am no longer required to just take it when you insult me. Your living self was a spiteful, petty man, and he would have torn you to shreds for being a barely passable imitation of himself. Enjoy eternity in a painting." That was the moment when Harry understood the family he had never known, understood why he did not want to be remembered like the pale echo in paint and canvas. This wasn't Snape, just a caricature of the vicious, ruthless man who had repeatedly stepped in to try and protect Harry, despite hating him to the depths of his soul. Harry Potter would never sit for a wizarding portrait, and he swore there and then that Snape's portrait would burn the first chance he got. He didn't think he could get away with it when McGonagall was watching, but she wouldn't always be around to stop him. He didn't claim to know the toxic mind of Snape, but even he knew the man would not have wanted a tame portrait sitting in the headmistress's office for centuries to come. Harry owed him that much, at least. "Harry," Dumbledore sounded disappointed. "No." Harry turned to watch McGonagall again. Her expression left no doubt that if he had been a student, he would have been in detention until Christmas. "I willingly walked to my death, headmistress. I've paid any imaginary dues I might have had to the wizarding world. I don't owe you or Hogwarts or anyone but my family a bloody thing." He stood a little straighter, acutely aware that he was still shorter than McGonagall. "Kick me out of the Order if you want. Voldemort is dead. It's not like there's much use for it now. Would that be all? I know Ron and Hermione are waiting for me." The headmistress watched him with a severe expression. None of the portraits spoke, all the proof Harry needed that his family had been right about them, and enough to make him wonder once more what Doria Black had been like in life. "You've changed, Mr. Potter." "Probably yes." Harry saw no point in denying it. McGonagall's lips pressed into a thin line in disapproval. "Yes, Mr. Potter, that would be all," she finally said. Harry nodded once in greeting and left the office to make his way back to Grimmauld. As expected, both his friends were waiting when he arrived with a soft crack of apparition. Unlike what he expected, neither of them looked particularly pleased. He also, he noticed, couldn't feel them through the bond anymore. "You owe us an explanation, Harry," Hermione told him bluntly. The meeting with McGonagall? Harry was a little confused. "The Lestranges, but you're quite right. I want answers about your deplorable behaviour at Hogwarts, too. We've been very careful not to ask about those articles in the Prophet, but you owe us that much. The Cruciatus? The Killing Curse?" "Harry!" Harry didn't bother asking if they were sure they wanted to know. Hermione had undoubtedly thought everything through, including the fact that it would remove Harry's way of getting around Veritaserum. Whether it was because they were sure the Aurors wouldn't bother questioning him under it again or as a sort of punishment, reminder, Harry didn't know. "All right," he agreed. "Can I ask why, at least?" Ron glanced at Hermione. It had been her decision then. "Because I won't let that bond be a cover for cold-blooded murder." She pursed her lips and looked very much like McGonagall in that moment. "They already questioned you once. They won't bother you about that again." "Hopefully," Harry mentally added, but didn't correct her. "You have been very good at keeping us out of the loop to keep your secrets safe from Veritaserum, but I don't approve of what I see. I want the truth, Harry." She probably hadn't meant it as an order, but the vow took it as one anyway. The only warning he got was a sharp burn around his chest and throat, a smouldering thread of magic that tightened underneath his skin, through bone and muscle, until it wrapped around his lungs and windpipe and twisted. Harry inhaled sharply at the sudden constriction, hands instinctively grasping for the magic that went right through his fingers. The magic tightened the instant he tried to reach for it, and he stopped, forced down the panic, forced himself to not move as much as an inch. And slowly the vow eased enough that he could breathe again. Barely. "Harry! Harry!" Hermione's voice cut through the haze, enough to make him focus on the world beyond his burning lungs. Harry wondered distantly if she had actually felt the magic as the other half of the vow. Both she and Ron had their wands out, but neither seemed willing to cast. Worried, maybe, that it would make it worse. One breath, then another, just enough yield to keep breathing as long as he didn't try to fight it again. Right, the vow. He took a shuddering breath. "I guess I deserved that." The thread eased another fraction of an inch. The next breath came a little easier. "Harry?" Hermione, worried and a little frightened. "It wasn't an order. You don't have to answer, Harry." Except it was, even if she hadn't meant it like that, and the vow took it as such. Her words did nothing to ease the constrictions or the vicious compulsion to answer whatever she asked. Harry closed his eyes and simply focused on the magic of the vow and each careful breath he took. "I used blood magic to track Rabastan Lestrange. We found them in a safe house. I brought down the wards with fiendfire, and George used one of their failed prank experiments to take them out." The magic eased as he spoke, just enough that he could keep talking. It still felt like it was a heartbeat away from choking him again. "We brought them to the cells to interrogate them, but they proved partially resistant to Veritaserum. They couldn't lie, but they volunteered no additional information. Every answer was like pulling teeth. I suspected both of them had training in resisting the Imperious Curse, but I've learned from experience that resisting is a lot harder when you're suffering the after-effects of a crucio." Someone took a sharp breath. Harry wasn't sure if it was Ron or Hermione, and he didn't want to open his eyes to find out. The vow felt almost like a living thing, and he didn't want to take a wrong step now. "I cast both spells on them, the Cruciatus and the Imperious, and wrung everything useful out of them. George suggested a cutting curse afterwards, but it wasn't enough. They had targeted my family, terrified my godson, and I wanted them dead more than anything." The words had flowed easily, encouraged by the vow, but now he still hesitated. "I cast the killing curse," he continued, "and we apparated the bodies across England. Then we left a timed portkey that would send them to the ministry atrium several hours later when our trace was cold. I gave Neville their wands. It felt like the right thing to do." Another heartbeat. "I cast the curses, and I suggested them in the first place. George had nothing to do with it." Finally, the magic eased enough that he didn't feel like he was being strangled, and he took a deep, relieved breath and opened his eyes again. The burn in his lungs remained, a vicious reminder of the vow. Ron was frowning and looked torn between bloody hell and they deserved it. Hermione. She frowned just a little, her lips still pursed, but Harry couldn't read her beyond that. "I didn't think hunt down Death Eaters meant cold-blooded murder," she said. "Blishwick was supposed to be an exception." "I know." The coil of the vow tightened again in not particularly kind encouragement, and Harry continued. "You wouldn't approve, so I didn't tell you." The magic loosened again. Breathing became easier. The slightly more analytical part of his mind could appreciate the difference between Veritaserum and the vow, but that did not make it any more pleasant when the vow bore down on him. "What does it feel like?" Ron asked with morbid curiosity. "The vow, I mean," he hurriedly added, before the vow could decide that he was curious about the unforgivables instead. "Almost normal when my reply is thorough and honest." Harry hesitated, but continued before the vow could force him. "Somewhat like being strangled by magic if it decides I've left something important out. I wouldn't even try to lie." Hermione made a small sound and covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide and horrified again. "That wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't even an order." Ron shifted a little uneasily. I don't think anyone really knows for sure how unbreakable vows work. I mean, the simple ones, they're easy, but the longer ones, sometimes they get a mind of their own, Dad says. Harry swore to answer truthfully and without omission if you asked him to. You really wanted an explanation, and the vow probably picked up on that and took it as an order. Hermione, Harry said tiredly. Ask your questions, all of them. I don't want to do this again any time soon, so I might as well get it over with now. Hermione trailed off. All of them were silent, as she seemed to think everything through, worry and concern warring with distaste as her expression changed. I don't like this. It's no different from Veritaserum. Veritaserum won't kill you. No, Harry agreed. I suppose it won't. Ask your questions. You both deserve the truth. Hermione was silent for a long time. Then she made a soft sound. What is your plan for the Death Eaters still at large? She sounded like she suspected the answer, but wasn't sure she wanted to know for sure. The vow, however, did not leave much of a choice. Hunt them down and ensure they won't be a problem again. The magic tightened almost imperceptible in a silent warning. Kill them, you mean? Harry nodded. Most likely. The magic tightened fractions of an inch more and he shuddered. Hand some over to the ministry maybe, but yes, capture, interrogate, kill, get everything we can from them, information, gold, anything, and make sure they won't be a threat again. With the Dementors gone from Azkaban, how long before the first Death Eaters imprisoned there managed to escape? I don't want my family and friends to live in fear. That's murder! But they won't hurt anyone else again. Hermione was silent. Harry felt a little like one of Crookshank's snacks under her scrutiny. The dark magic is affecting you. I know, I'm sorry. It wasn't a lie either. The vow would not permit it. He wasn't sorry for what he was doing, but he would regret for the rest of his life what it might to do Ron and Hermione. This isn't who you are, Hermione swallowed. The anger, we heard you arguing with the headmistress. I don't know, Ron said wryly. Harry couldn't feel anything through the bond, but it seemed like he was starting to come around. He was a pretty moody Burke in 6th year. You didn't share a dorm with him. Git! Harry threw a stinging hex at him. At least I don't snore like a dragon with the sniffles. Ron shifted just enough to dodge it, looking entirely too cheerful about it. Sorriest excuse for a Dark Lord I've ever seen. He's got a nose and everything. He doesn't own a black robe that isn't from Hogwarts, and his hair looks like Norbert nested in it. Ron! Hermione almost managed to hiss the name. This time it was Ron's turn to sigh. Merlin, Hermione, it's still Harry. Yes, he's an impulsive, reckless prat with the temper of a disgruntled Nundu and about half the charm. But that's not dark magic, that's Harry. He's just a little more obvious about it these days. It is affecting me, Harry admitted with the unsubtle encouragement of the vow, but not as much as you think. The temper was always there. I've had to keep my mouth shut a lot of times. I just didn't have to this time. The magic... My emotions feel stronger, like everything is amplified, but they're still mine. Hermione didn't look entirely convinced. Harry sighed. I can't lie? No, but we don't know if the vow considers it the truth if you wholeheartedly believe something that's wrong. It was a good point. Harry only shrugged. He wasn't an expert in that sort of thing, although he didn't doubt that Hermione would research it the first chance she got. Why did you decide to do this? Become a Dark Lord? She asked instead and changed the topic again. For Teddy. I won't let him grow up as a second-class person. Voldemort had won anyway, he continued, encouraged by the vow. It wasn't like anything I could do would make it much worse. He tried to stop there, but the vow twisted and he hissed sharply as it tightened around his neck. And madness runs in the Black family. It's the inbreeding or the magic, maybe both, I don't know. My dad had it, my grandfather had it, all the way back to Isla Black. Doria believes I got it too. Not as bad as Sirius, but I got the recklessness and impulsiveness. What do you mean Voldemort had won anyway? Hermione demanded. Back to the same old racism, the same old blood politics, the same old society. Sure, Voldemort is dead and they got rid of the most insane of his laws, but an entire war later and we're back where we started. Tell me how exactly we managed to win a damn thing. Voldemort is dead. And Malfoy is alive. Malfoy, Avery, and who knows how many unmarked supporters still in the Ministry or St. Mungo's or Hogwarts. You saw how many of the traditionally dark families chose to distance themselves from any marked member of their family and made a lot of noise about how disappointed and horrified they were. Do you really think it was all one little black sheep or two in those families, that they didn't have the support of the rest of them? Not's father is in Azkaban. Is his brother or uncle any better, except for not being marked? Is he? They sacrificed one or two of their own to continue the way they always have. Hermione looked unhappy. You don't know that? No, but I'm pretty damn sure. Sure enough to risk killing innocents. The vow tightened before Harry could even consider anything but the truth. Yes, he managed, and the magic eased. Because if they were all that horrified, they should bloody well have done more and not left it to us. Hermione froze. The vow froze with her, enough of a sign that her emotions were running the gauntlet from horrified to angry to concerned and understanding, even if her expression hadn't made that abundantly clear. She had the ability to stop him with a word. But if even she didn't know what she wanted, the vow had no chance at all. Harry chanced a glance at Ron. He was frowning, although Harry couldn't read his expression enough to tell what exactly he was frowning about, and the bond was little help. He hadn't started yelling yet, though. Harry figured that was a good sign. You can't kill innocents. Hermione seemed to have found her voice again. The fact that he could still breathe seemed like a good sign, too. It doesn't justify killing innocents. And it's not just them. They have families, loved ones. Is that why the wizarding world was so willing to leave everything up to children? Harry felt tired and weary and done, finally putting words to a question that he had thought about all too often over the past year. I'm an orphan with no close family to speak of. Your family is all muggle and hardly counts to the average wizard or witch. And Ron, well, he's a pure blood, but the Weasleys are blood traitors and have plenty of sons. I suppose the youngest one would be expendable in that case. If we'd failed, we wouldn't have pulled anyone down with us. Ron's expression went from frowning to furious to flat in seconds. Then, long seconds later, it eased into plain tiredness. He's right. Ron sat down heavily and sighed, sounding as drained as Harry felt. People told Percy the same, that the rest of us were blood traitors, but that he was of pure, proper stock and would return the Weasley name to its place of prominence when the rest of us had been put in our place. Killed, he didn't need to say. They might not have sat down and thought about it like that, but it's true. Muggles don't matter to most. Harry was easy to distance themselves from when it got a little too dangerous, and I'm just another Weasley. You only need to keep a couple of those around to carry on the family name. Everyone knows we breed like common muggles, Ron finished bitterly. Malfoy told Dad that often enough. Ron! Hermione turned his name into a soft, sympathetic sound. Harry stayed quiet, feeling the distinct need to stay out of it. I won't kill people in cold blood, Ron seemed to search for the right way to explain. Battle is one thing when someone's casting curses at me. I can't do it when I have to think about it. I don't want to be able to, but I'm not going to condemn Harry for it. It's murder, Ron shrugged. Dark Lord, he said, with his usual lack of tact. Blue eyes flickered to Harry before they turned to Hermione again. I trust him. Can't say I'm sorry to see the Lestranges gone. And if it's not Death Eaters one day? The interrogation seemed to have turned into an argument between the two of them. Harry ignored for now. Ron shrugged again. Then I trust he had a good reason for that too. Hermione fell silent and simply watched Ron with the focused expression Harry associated with her being deep in thought. Harry supposed she had a point. Ron's answer was all it came down to in the end. Ron had decided to trust him and back him to the end, stubborn, loyal Gryffindor to the core. He had made that decision a long time ago, and Harry shouldn't have been this surprised to see him brush aside cold-blooded murder, even if the victims had been the Lestranges. Harry supposed that was why Hermione held the vow too. She questioned things that Ron shrugged off and accepted. In the end, she simply sighed. The lingering threat of the vow eased as it returned to its usual passive state. "I don't like it," she said, and put 100 different meanings into the words and their bond. "I know," Harry agreed. Hermione hesitated, then took a step forward and hugged him, clinging to him tightly. "Oh, Harry," she said softly, and let him pick up the accompanying emotions from their bond. Regret and love and worry, and beneath it all the sadness that this was necessary at all, and the fear of what price it would eventually demand of him. Ron joined them, wrapping his arms around both of them, and they simply remained there for a long time, soothing the lingering pain from the vow and the borderline interrogation. Harry had won their argument, but it felt equally like he had just lost something precious he would never get back. "You'll need to learn some way to defend your mind," Harry told George when things had calmed down a little and he could risk a visit. "Veritaserum too, but we've only managed a small workaround so far." George's eyes sharpened. "Occlumency, we overheard some of the headmaster and Snape's discussions. Only if you have some idea of it already. I'm crap at what little I know about it, and my legilimency is all blunt force," Harry admitted. "Hermione searched through the library but didn't find much. The few things we found all mentioned that to get it right, you need someone to actually teach you. And according to Dorea's portrait, the Black Madness doesn't work well with occlumency at all." George nodded slowly. Harry could almost see his mind at work. "Anything else in that library that might work?" "The theory behind occlumency. Hermione found a chapter about that, for what good it does. She's worked on it, but hasn't made much progress, and I don't want to risk my legilimency on her to test it." Another nod. "I'll owl her. We might be able to work something out together. Veritaserum?" "The bond gives some degree of protection," Harry said. "The truth aspect of the potion still allows us to use a truth that isn't our own. Ron could honestly say that he didn't know who killed the Lestranges, so I could do the same. He suspected it, yes, but he didn't know. They tested me for the antidote and memory charms before they dosed me, so that's out. I've been put under Veritaserum regularly for close to a year, and those are the only protections we've found so far. Otherwise, we're back to occlumency, and—" He trailed off with a shrug. "Another thing to discuss with Hermione, then?" George's eyes narrowed. "I get the strange impression there's something you're not saying, Ickle Lordship." Harry ran a hand through his hair, one of those nervous habits that he still occasionally caught himself doing. "The imperious defense wouldn't work if they used Veritaserum." "It would if I cast the imperious on you," Harry said quietly, "and as long as they weren't too specific about when the curse was cast." For a long time, George simply watched him, his expression blank. Then he reached out and flicked Harry sharply on the nose. Harry didn't doubt he looked as startled as he felt. "What? Bad, Dark Lord. Bad." "No biscuit," George said. Then he smiled, a little wry and a little tired. "I won't let you take the fall when I'm the one cheerfully working with a Dark Lord. You can't defend yourself under Veritaserum. Why should I?" "I have the bond. Well, as long as they didn't ask the wrong questions. Minor detail, that. And I'll probably have occlumency. Me and Hermione will work it out." He sounded so confident it was almost like having the old George back. Harry was reasonably sure he could have managed an Imperious before George could have dodged it, but he wasn't going to try. George had made his decision, and Harry was going to respect it. And he really didn't want to be the sort of person who threw unforgivables at his friends against their will, even if it was for their own good. In early July, Hermione received a letter from Professor Flitwick inviting her to Hogwarts for tea and charms discussion. "We started talking when I visited Professor Dumbledore's portrait to learn the Fidelius." Hermione sounded exasperated. "We've exchanged letters about it and general charms theory frequently since. He's been gone since the end of the school year and only recently returned to Hogwarts. Not everything is a trap, Harry. Right after McGonagall threw a fit about my turning dark, that's awfully convenient." Hermione glared, probably mostly because he didn't refer to the headmistress by her proper title, but Ron cut in before she could retort. "Not to sound like Mad-Eye," he said carefully, well aware of the dangers of Hermione in a temper, "but he's got a point. McGonagall didn't sound happy, but everyone knows that Harry's stubborn as a hippogriff if he doesn't want to talk. If you can't get through to him, me or you would be the second choice then, and I've got no reason to visit. He's Professor Flitwick, Hermione snapped. He's a respected teacher and a master of his art, not a cleverly disguised Death Eater. At least try to see it from our point of view, Harry tried. Please. Hermione's tight expression eased slightly. We have the bond. We'll be able to communicate. Let one of us come along. We'd feel better if you weren't alone. In potential enemy territory, Ron refrained from saying with a surprising amount of tact. Because I'm a girl? Hermione's glare was back at full strength. No, because I'll be damned if I let you face down a potentially hostile force alone, Ron said bluntly, his brief visit from tact forgotten. We let Harry go alone, and we bloody well shouldn't have. We didn't think it would be a problem, because it was Hogwarts and McGonagall. And look at how that turned out. Hermione glanced at Harry, and her expression softened. Harry would have felt a bit offended being used as the example if it hadn't been true. He would have felt a lot better with someone physically there to have his back. He couldn't go back and change it, but they could keep Hermione from ending up in the same situation. All right, she relented. Harry, then. He was the one who cast the Fidelius, and they'll know something is up if Ron Weasley volunteers for hours of tea and academic discussions. And Professor Flitwick won't wonder about me? Harry asked dryly. Hermione shrugged. Well, of course, but you were the caster, and everyone will assume I nagged you into coming along. Will that do? Harry and Ron exchanged a glance. It went unsaid that Ron would, by pure coincidence, find himself in George's shop while they were off at Hogwarts, conveniently near reinforcements should something go wrong. Neither of them felt like telling Hermione that, though. You may want to warn him that the headmistress and I parted on less than ideal terms, but... Harry ran a hand through his hair and sighed. No objections from me. They arrived at Hogwarts a bright and early Monday morning. The weather was mild, and the Forbidden Forest stretched on forever, and the wards somehow felt a little more forgiving than last time. Possibly because Flitwick was the acting headmaster this week, with McGonagall out of the country on a brief vacation. He had told them as much when he had invited them for Monday, sparing Harry any unpleasant further confrontations with the headmistress or the portraits. Phileas Flitwick met them at the gates and led them to his office, talking about inconsequential little things until they were safely behind privacy wards and out of view of any portraits. Harry wasn't sure if it was a consideration for Hermione and himself, both well known for being somewhat paranoid these days, or because Flitwick himself felt safer with those precautions. There was tea waiting for them, along with small pastries. Books of every shape and size seemed to be the dominant life form around, crowding the floor-to-ceiling bookcases that lined nearly every bit of the wall and encroaching on the low desk as well as the window-sill. It was Hermione's natural habitat too, and even Harry had grown to appreciate it, having spent months upon months in the library at Grimmauld. "It's a delight to see you again, Miss Granger," the Professor smiled when they'd all had the chance for a cup of tea, "though I'm surprised you managed to convince Mr. Potter to come along." Considering the topic, or the fact that he was on somewhat bad terms with the headmistress, Flitwick didn't clarify. Harry assumed it was both. Ravenclaws could be almost as good as Slytherins when it came to subtle questioning if they wanted to be. I know better than to argue when she's got an idea. Harry's fond voice took any possible sting out of his words. The wards felt different this time, he said mildly, a little less suspicious and intrusive. Flitwick nodded slowly. The normally exuberant expression on his features had been missing already, but now his smile turned a little resigned too. "I informed the wards that you were my guests and not a potential threat. I'm sorry to say that they had not been given the same instructions upon your last visit." He did not specify if it had been deliberate on the part of the headmistress. Harry was polite enough not to ask. "They sound like extremely powerful wards, Professor. Why didn't Professor Dumbledore raise those wards earlier?" Hermione asked hesitantly. Harry didn't need the bond to tell him it was her reluctance to potentially criticize an authority figure that was rearing its head again. "I doubt anyone but Albus Dumbledore himself knows for certain," Flitwick answered tiredly, "but I believe it to be a political issue. Minerva is fortunate. She has a mostly tame board of governors. Few people are foolish enough to interfere with the protection of the school, and certainly not this shortly after the end of the war. Albus Dumbledore faced a board of governors with Lucius Malfoy as its chairman. Even after he was dismissed, the board remained traditionalist. The current wards are invasive enough that the board would never have accepted it, and Fudge could easily have been convinced that raising them was Albus's first step in claiming control of wizarding Britain. It could have stopped Ginny's possession. It could have stopped Crouch Jr. from entering the school as Mad-Eye. It could have weeded out the marked students. Flitwick nodded. "Very likely, yes. It would also have been a severe breach of privacy, though against Voldemort such concerns would matter very little." "Breach of privacy?" Hermione frowned. "As deputy headmaster, I have access to the wards in Minerva's absence this week," Flitwick said mildly. "And may I say it's an intriguing mark both you and Mr. Potter wear on your shoulders? The headmistress would not have noticed it. She does not have the sensitivity for such delicate work, but to a charms master. Panic, brief and painfully bright, forced aside by the icy chill of sitting in the office of a highly competent potential enemy." And then Hermione gripped his hand so tightly it hurt. "The professor can sense our marks," she told Ron. They both felt his echoing worry, followed by grim determination. "Need a hand?" Flitwick hadn't moved. Hermione's grip eased. "No. If he wanted to act on it, he could have done it earlier, before warning us," Harry answered for both of them. He took a calming breath, but didn't quite manage to push the sudden rush of adrenaline and fear aside. "Point made, Professor." His voice sounded even, if barely. Harry would take what he could get. "If it's any comfort, it was not easily spotted, even for powerful bit of dark arts. I only noticed it because I already had my suspicions. I am old enough to have seen the rise of another Dark Lord, although that one was far less benign." Flitwick took a sip of his tea, seemingly unaffected by the sudden tension in both Harry and Hermione. Harry certainly wasn't stupid enough to assume he hadn't noticed. "It was mostly confirmed by Mr. Potter's presence here. You have been here previously alone without issue, Miss Granger, and I know Mr. Potter has little interest in the theory of charms work. I could be mistaken, of course, but he acts and moves like a protector. And there are precious few reasons I can think of why he would see your presence here as a threat to you." Another calm sip of tea. "I would be quite surprised if the youngest Mr. Weasley was not waiting somewhere should it prove necessary, likely with reinforcements." Hermione's glance at Harry turned into a glare at his vaguely guilty look. "George's shop," he confessed. "We'll talk about that later. If it's that easy to spot a would-be Dark Lord, I'm surprised no one saw Tom Riddle's reign coming." Harry's voice might have been just a little spiteful, but he figured that he had the right to be. A lot of problems could have been averted if someone had stepped in before Voldemort became the sheer force of terror he had eventually turned into. "I think they did, Mr. Potter, but no one wanted to see it, and the wizarding world is very skilled at ignoring that what it does not wish to confront. He was handsome, powerful, and charming, and had the backing of highly influential people. No one wanted to cross that sort of man." He fell silent as he watched his two guests. "You do not have quite the same backing, or indeed his insidious charm, but you do have the notoriety of the man who won. You may not have noticed it yourself, and certainly not since you have shied away from the public the past year, but to those who know you, the changes are obvious. You were never studious, yet you have clearly thrown yourself into the pursuit of knowledge. You feel remarkably dark to the wards, far more so than the seventh-year students of traditionally dark families. You have lost the Quidditch tan, and you have grown far more confrontational than you ever were before. You have all but isolated yourself, and the few people you are seen with, your godson and Miss Granger, for instance, you are obviously ready to defend with lethal force. Not necessarily the signs of a Dark Lord." Harry watched him carefully, ready to move should he prove to be a threat after all, and Flitwick arched an eyebrow in response. Indeed, I do notice the lack of denial, however, and, whatever else you may think, Mr. Potter, I am well aware that you have both the magical power and the dissatisfaction with the state of things required to see it happen." The Professor fell silent. Harry felt Hermione's hand tighten around his again, and he squeezed it lightly in support. Then Flitwick spoke, looking far more tired than they had seen him before. "Hogwarts failed you dreadfully, Mr. Potter. We failed a number of students, but few as badly as you. I doubt you will hear this from the headmistress, as she was Albus's understudy for far too long to believe him capable of mistakes, but I believe it's the truth. We failed you in a number of ways, as much as we failed a young boy named Tom Riddle. And it is only by the grace of magic and your own strength of character that you did not simply pick up where he left off." Hermione had taken a sharp breath at the sound of Voldemort's birth name. "Harry isn't—" "Voldemort? No, Miss Granger, he isn't." Flitwick made a tired sound. "But I also refuse to believe an 11-year-old child could be irredeemably evil. At 16, certainly the murder of poor Myrtle proved that. But at 11, I wonder sometimes how many lives could have been saved if someone had given that child a proper chance and guided his ruthless ambition towards something far less horrendous." The man paused. "In truth, I doubt it would have worked, but sometimes I wonder. Hogwarts, it seems, has begun an unpleasant track record in regards to powerful young orphans with no one to speak up for them. It was the same thing Harry himself had wondered, when sleep meant nightmares, and his mind kept going over every mistake he'd ever made, telling him he could have done more, done better. Hogwarts had failed miserably with the young Tom Riddle. Why had they learned nothing from it? Why had they let Luna be bullied year after year? Why had they let Hermione be mocked for her blood and Ron for being a blood traitor? Why had they looked at him, another dark-haired, powerful, isolated orphan, and kept doing the same thing that had seen the birth of Voldemort? "He asked me once to join him." Harry spoke before he was aware of it. The words felt like a lump in his throat. "I was 11, and he was possessing Quirrell. He offered me my parents back if I gave him the stone. Looking back, I suppose he would have killed me anyway if I'd agreed," he added clinically. Flitwick looked pained. Harry hadn't been sure if Dumbledore had shared that story. Now he suspected he hadn't. "Perhaps not. As a beacon of the light, you would have been a priceless asset in the enemy camp if he trained you right." "Good point." Harry tried to imagine himself like a male Bellatrix Lestrange and couldn't make the mental image fit. He forcefully kept his thoughts away from Wormtail. "I don't suppose it matters much. He never asked again. Maybe Quirrell had been desperate. Maybe Harry had just been that much less of a threat at 11. He doubted he would ever know." "It matters, Mr. Potter. No child should have had to face Voldemort, much less make a choice like that. Not at 11, not at 12, and not at any other time we left it to children to stand against the darkness." The Professor fell silent for a while, lost in his own thoughts. Harry wasn't in any hurry to interrupt him, and neither was Hermione. "I am surprised," Flitwick eventually said, "to find Miss Granger go along with this idea, surprised and strangely heartened. Because Hermione was the brain behind the operation, or because her moral compass seemed more reliable to Flitwick than Harry's, who knew? Harry certainly wasn't going to ask. "It took a while to convince me." Hermione raised her head, a little defiant. "He made some good points, though." Flitwick nodded. "Equal rights, I assume. Remus and young Teddy Lupin, you were made his godfather, were you not, Mr. Potter?" It wasn't really a question, so Harry didn't answer. "Has he shown sign of his father's affliction?" "No." Not that it would matter to the purists in charge. Remus Lupin was a werewolf. Teddy would be tainted by association. "You know the wizarding world, Professor. This is the same kind of blood-purist beliefs that gave birth to Voldemort, the same kind of prejudice that gave him the support of so many of the dark creatures and left generations of Muggle-born struggling to even find a job. Nothing Professor Dumbledore did after the First Blood War helped," Hermione pleaded. "Nothing Shacklebolt has done now has genuinely changed anything. We have to try, because no one else seems willing to do so. This can end with Harry." It could, Flitwick conceded. It could also throw our world back into decades of war. Does it matter when we'll still have another Voldemort or Grindelwald in 15 years at the most? Harry was becoming depressingly familiar with that argument. A muggle-born or part human with a grudge and too much power, or a pure blood out to eradicate the tainted blood of the wizarding world? I don't suppose it matters much which one. A lot can change in 15 years. At this rate, nothing good. Tired of the argument, Harry leaned back in the chair with a confidence he didn't feel. You're about a year too late to convince me that the British wizarding world deserves anything other than to be picked apart and rebuilt into something useful. I'm sure the headmistress and Snape's portrait will be happy to tell you all about how stubborn and impulsive and bull-headed I am. I've made up my mind. I will quite happily damn myself and nail my colours next to Grindelwald's if it lets Teddy grow up in a better world. I don't particularly want to be a Dark Lord, but then no one asked me if I wanted to be the Chosen One either. And I have plenty of visions from Voldemort to draw on. Harry! Hermione was not happy. Flitwick just looked a little resigned. Dark magic will bring out recklessness, Miss Granger, and Mr. Potter already had it to spare. Grindelwald was known for his wild nature. Voldemort had his obsessiveness and utter belief in his invincibility. And Harry will be known for his recklessness and poor impulse control. Hermione sighed. Oh, Harry. Nothing for it, I suppose. Flitwick simply watched Harry for a long time, looking for something that Harry wasn't sure about. You will meet resistance. You are not the first person to have decided to change the Ministry by force. So far they have weathered all challenges. The Ministry caved to Voldemort. Voldemort fell, Flitwick said bluntly, and the Ministry stands once more as it always did. Perhaps I should have let Voldemort keep it then, Harry didn't say, because he knew he didn't mean it the moment the thought had formed. There was a lot of the wizarding world he could do without, but the bits he loved would have been the ones to suffer the most. That alone had made Voldemort's final defeat a necessity. A Dark Lord is a force of nature, boy, utterly merciless and unrelenting. Your determination will be tested soon enough. I will test your magic, a protego horribilis, if you please. Preferably small enough to fit the room. A personal shield will do. Hermione bit her lip. Professor, that's the least I would expect Mr. Potter to know should he stand any chance of surviving this, Flitwick interrupted. He wouldn't be the first powerful wizard to use a protego horribilis as a personal shield. The headmaster of Durmstrang during the rise of Grindelwald quite favoured it, I'm told. A useful shield charm, although there are terribly few who can cast it. There is a reason we don't teach it at Hogwarts. Well, Mr. Potter? Harry glanced at Hermione, then stood. He took another look around the room to get the dimensions right and raised his wand. This was a test, and Flitwick was right. It was a powerful, demanding spell, brutal in its demand for magic and eager to claim all you had to give to strengthen the shield. It was also capable of taking an obscene amount of punishment in the hands of a skilled wizard, and Harry knew it too. It had not been brought out by Flitwick in the defence of Hogwarts for nothing. Harry could cast the shield without any issues verbally, but stubbornness kept him silent now. It was a test, and Harry wasn't about to back down. He raised his wand, went through familiar motions, not an inch too much to the left or right, only a little too much of a curl at the end of it like he always did, and felt more than saw the shield snap into place around him. It was a perfect sphere, above and below ground, large enough to cover the three of them completely, but with plenty of space to the bookcases on either side. The shield was almost invisible, but when Harry moved his head, he saw the flicker of sunlight from the window hit the transparent shield and the shimmer of what looked like heat waves. Ah, Mr. Potter, don't forget to release it. Right, that part he was still learning to do a lot faster. Harry took a slow breath, fixed the shield in his mind, and carefully lowered his wand. Flitwick stood up on his chair and jabbed at the inside of the shield with his wand. The heat waves seemed to shimmer a little more, but didn't move. Then he moved outside and tried again, jabbing a little harder. The shield stayed where it was, and Flitwick's expression lightened just a little. Very nice, the small professor complimented him. Good, solid, with perfect spell passage outwards. You know, Miss Granger, this sort of shield won me several duels. Marvellous shield it is. Now go ahead, boy, cast a spell. Let's see how you hold it. Harry could feel the shield as a whisper at the edge of his awareness. It felt harmless now that the initial rush of magic was gone, but he knew from experience the whisper could become a roar when sufficiently powerful dark magic hit it, and the shield demanded more magic from him. He wondered what spell to use, and then found himself casting it before he had consciously decided. Expecto Patronum! The memories were warm and glowing in his mind, and the silver stag that appeared from his wand was familiar and welcome. Prongs leapt to the edge of the shield and huffed at the construct, leaving little wisps of ethereal silver in the heat shimmers. Then he tossed his head and faded away, leaving the room just a little colder and less welcoming again. Flitwick made a delighted sound. Excellent, excellent! The small professor turned, wand still in his hand, and a wall of blindingly purple energy slammed into Harry's shield with the force of the Hogwarts Express before he had even registered that Flitwick had cast a spell. Harry! Blind panic hit, followed instantly by blind rage, but he still had spots dancing in his vision, and he couldn't cast without risking Hermione's safety. Then Hermione was in his mind, and the world cleared. Harry! Bloody hell! Flitwick! Ron did not sound happy about the spell or the thought of having to fight their way out of Hogwarts, but the few seconds of clarity made Harry realize something else. Flitwick had cast once a spell Harry hadn't recognized, but which clearly meant business. But he hadn't cast again. A test? Harry was surprised to find his voice come out hoarse. One which you barely passed, but the potential is there, I suppose, your shield held. Miss Granger, as I assume you and Mr. Weasley are his primary training partners, his reaction time needs to be significantly improved in both defense and offense. A true idea of his skills will be impossible outside of actual combat, but he needs to be faster. I could have cast that spell another 3 or 4 times in the time it took him to do something. Flitwick climbed down from the chair and walked slowly around Harry. Your wand movements need to be more accurate. The end of the spell was barely acceptable. Being a Dark Lord is no excuse for sloppiness, boy. If anything, it's all the more reason to cast flawlessly. Dark arts are forgiving only when it works in their favor. Some will turn on you at the slightest chance. You are not training for the auras or to pass defense. A Dark Lord may have followers and resources, but in the end he must be prepared to stand alone against a wizarding nation. You are a Gryffindor, Mr. Potter, honorable and brave, and whatever other drivel that Hogwarts installs in you. Are you prepared to do that? Stand alone when all others turn on you and you become the villain that you have been taught to fight. Harry's grip on his wand tightened. Ron and Hermione won't turn on me. Gryffindor! Flitwick spat the word like an insult. They may die. They may defy you when you turn from righteous to ruinous. Then what, boy? When your careful strategies and hiding places fail and you stand before an army, then I fight every last one of them if I have to. A lost battle? For what purpose, boy? To satisfy your foolish Gryffindor ideals? Dark Lords have been mostly Slytherin for a reason. Something in Harry snapped. Because if I kill enough of them, then maybe there won't be enough old blood left to rebuild the same useless society as before. For long seconds, the air in the office was utterly still and silent, and heavy with barely contained magic. Flitwick's expression was inscrutable. And the hat wanted me in Slytherin, Harry bit out. If it matters a damn thing. More than you think, Flitwick eventually said, and less perhaps too. He stopped his walk around Harry. You'll do. More Grindelwald than Voldemort, and I suppose that's all we can hope for. Go, Mr. Potter, and don't return unless Hogwarts is under your command. The headmistress is pure blood and human. She would be far less understanding than I am. It wasn't a blessing, but it was close enough. Thank you, Professor, Hermione said softly for both of them. Flitwick made a tired sound. End it, Mr. Potter. I don't see anyone else who will. Harry's 19th birthday sneaked up on him like a particularly persistent doxy. They didn't celebrate it. Like Ron and Hermione had when their birthdays had rolled around, Harry much preferred the quietness of Grimmauld. There were presents and cards from friends and what little family he had left. There was a cake from Molly Weasley, who insisted on baking birthday cakes for all of her children. She understood if they didn't want to celebrate, but cakes were a tradition, and traditions mattered. There were some additional greetings from strangers who apparently kept track of such things, those he asked Mute to put aside. He would respond with a thank you form letter at a later time. Like Hermione's birthday, like Ron's birthday, they ended up in the library in Grimmauld with a bottle of fire whiskey the evening before his birthday. It probably wasn't a sign of a healthy way of coping with their experiences, but none of them particularly cared. Tomorrow they would have birthday cake and open presents and enjoy the sunshine, and people would drop by and visit for a little while. Tonight was just for the three of them. From the depths of the old dining room they heard the first heavy chime from the grandfather clock. They listened unmoving as 12 chimes rang through the house and fell silent, leaving only ghostly echoes behind. Only then did Ron raise his glass with an unusually solemn expression. "To friendship, to family," Harry spoke around the lump in his throat. Hermione raised her glass to theirs. "To the end," she softly said. We hope you enjoyed this chapter. Please consider supporting our project by joining our Patreon linked in the description, or become a member here on YouTube, where you will get access to several additional chapters weeks before they release on YouTube.